All right, welcome back and many thanks for staying with us right here on Morning at NTV. Some 281 million and counting cases of COVID-19 have been registered on the whole global stage. It is actually imperative that you exercise caution. Wear a face mask if you haven't been vaccinated. Run to the nearest point. Yes, and get vaccinated. They are actually giving 3 jabs right now. They were approved by the Ministry of Health. You can get the Pfizer first jab, second jab, and the 3rd booster jab. It will increase your protectiveness against the Omicron variant that is highly transmissible. When you get into a whole concentration of more than 2 to 5 people, ensure social distancing of at least 2 to 3 meters. It is highly imperative that you do the same in the wake of skyrocketing cases of COVID-19 owed to the highly mutating and highly transmissible COVID-19 variant Omicron. Away from that, I do have Joseph Forteno. He's joining me right here on Morning at NTV. He is the other president of the UPC, but he'll actually be explaining to you, yes, why is the bona fide president of the Uganda People's Congress? What actually happened? There's a court case. They are already in court battling that. There's Jimmy Akena, there's Peter Walobedi, and he's going to be explaining to us all that. And of course, 2021 has been a very tumultuous year as far as political upheavals are concerned. You did have an election, January 14th. You did have a Supreme Court case, mid-2021. You did have a lot more taking center stage. We did have Kayunga, you know, degenerate into a lot of violence, left, right, and center, you know, re-echoing the dark landscape of a political, you know, and inhuman violations that took center stage in the just 2020, you know, presidential campaigns that took center stage in the previous year. All right, it's a lot. Joseph Forteno, good morning.
Good morning and nice to see you.
At some point you were in Nagongera?
No, it's actually the first Christmas while I'm in Uganda that I never spent in Nagongera.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of the first Christmas I spent outside Uganda and outside Nagongera. Yeah, in 1987. So it's extraordinary. But even then I was in Kampala and it was fine, fantastic, and I went around some few media houses, but at the same time I also did good pray. Good pray. But yes, I must say that it's very nice seeing you, and you're absolutely right that COVID is real, still continues, and people should go ahead and vaccinate.
And of course, Archbishop Desmond Tutu is no longer with us, passed away on Sunday. Of course, he was your friend. You sent me a text over the weekend talking to me about how, you know, you used to be so close back in the 70s.
I was not necessarily close to him as a friend, but these are people whom we looked up to, and we were, you know, that was at the peak of the anti-apartheid campaign. And I think I basically talked about this very specific high where he mobilized, you know, millions of people together with Winnie Mandela at the time, who were basically the stars outside. Oliver Tambo, to an extent, the late president of the African National Congress. Very, very rounded, possibly not as charismatic, but you know, these are the guys who pushed us. But that was a time when everybody knew what apartheid was. Everybody was engaged. Everybody to get engaged, and the youth around the world were engaged. And that was a time of real diversity, and the diversity was ideological beyond race. So it was very clear that many progressive, open white people felt apartheid was repugnant, felt the liberation of Southern Africa was something that needed to be done, and felt proudly with people like us who were as early as the mid-70s as young students during the Sharpeville 6 massacre, you know, in primary schools in Uganda, we rose up and stood up in solidarity with those guys. We don't see that at the moment. And that's why you're right, that when we see what happens in Uganda today, you wonder where are the youth. That is why I'm quickly telling you that my quickest, best high for this year was Uganda Medical Association's success in their push for their settlement with government, which was just a few weeks ago. But why? That is the biggest high, because it shows that when you take a position and you stay high in the interest of the people of this country, you know, whatever happens, if you organize sufficiently, there is a response. So to their credit, but quickly, it was not really about their times and conditions. I'm starting with it, but really also they said, we want masks, we want medical equipments, we want medicines in hospitals. Now, whether or not that is translated going forward, maybe I'm preempting you, I do not know, but that is my biggest tie. But yes, the biggest low was obviously how the elections took place early in the year following those massacres.
Of course, you're going to explain to us why there were super lows within that electoral race, but then I'm taking you back to Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Back then and now, before he died, because I'm taking a look at, you know, before he died, F.W. de Klerk also passed away. You understand, the father of apartheid within South Africa, and of course that was an entirely different conversation. Now you do have Desmond Tutu also passing away. Do you think he died with his head held high, saying, you know, based on what I fought for back in the day. You know, I'm very happy with the new South Africa that I'm living in. I'm very happy with the new Africa that I'm living in. Do you think he died with his head held high?
No, I think you're being rather cheeky there, but in a good way.
Indeed.
It's a very serious point, though. I think Desmond Tutu died a generally satisfied man, because one is a very religious guy, of course, he's the Archbishop, but he's also a very pragmatic political Christian. And so, from his point of view, with the roundings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, he genuinely believed in the unity, including the creation of the Rainbow Nation in South Africa, which by and large I had my own mixed feelings. Now, the Rainbow Nation in South Africa did not necessarily create the reality that Desmond Tutu thought and others thought. It is simply because the likes of de Klerk, and that's why I really didn't give much highlight, because I followed him very closely. These guys were prepared to take, and really sufficient to take, yes, but sufficiently, and the rest of the other side of Africans did not receive. But I think you're suggesting nuances here, that Desmond Tutu very quickly became rather despondent with the African National Congress, and made this public prayer that the ANC may lose elections, and it went rather badly in the circles of our good friends within the African National Congress. And for me, as a political observer and as a friend of the African National Congress, and indeed as a friend of a number of these guys, including in South Africa, I actually suggested we amongst the younger guys in the last 10, 15 years, who told the ANC guys that, look, you know, beyond picking from apartheid, the apartheid laws that you and I, whenever we have some of our background conversation, we have discussions that where you pick apartheid laws and then you apply it on ordinary Africans in Soweto. You pick applied apartheid economics and you apply it on the guys in Soweto who never saw, you know, running water inside them, and then you apply it together with the privileged laws to the other end of Sandton in Johannesburg. Why? It is because de Klerk believed that ANC was possibly, on the one hand, possibly not radical enough, but on the other, he wanted ANC to be rather conciliatory enough. So there's a bit of a contradiction there. But most importantly, the corruption, and particularly the corruption scandal of many people in the ANC, including the one which brought down Jacob Zuma, he was extremely critical. The good thing with him was he was open, he was prepared to take on these guys. He took on apartheid guys as well as he took on the post-apartheid governments of the African National Congress. I think that's a lesson for clerics around the world and for clerics around Africa, and perhaps some clerics in Uganda might have to, but need to look at Desmond Tutu as a role model. And for that, I actually agree with him.
You know, after he died, or even before he died, we saw a lot happening in Africa. You had coups, counter coups happening, you know, in so many countries, left, right, and center. You did have Sudan, you did have so many other countries, Mahamadi Doumbouya in that regard. You did have Mali, Assimi Goïta orchestrating coups and so forth. What do you make of what is happening and within the African settings as a whole? You do have many people who are saying that maybe we just did change guard back in the day, from the white ruler all the way to the black rulers. You do have the same black leaders right now who are using the same laws that took center stage during colonization and using them against the same black people that they are ruling right now in the name of consolidating power. Talk to us about that and whether Desmond Tutu was happy about this and happening within Africa, neo-colonization.
You know, governance is a very difficult thing. And as a leader within Uganda People's Congress, and a leader who was a young leader with the likes of Milton Obote, and reviewing what happened in UPC, including today, and reviewing what was happening in the two UPC governments, and reviewing what has been going on in Uganda since independence, critiquing every government, I generally recognize that sometimes some tough decisions can be made. So yes, it is generally very difficult to radically turn around a system that has been placed in for 70 years, or in this case for 700 years. But no, some of these radical changes actually have taken place, and in Uganda we did try to dismantle that. There is this thing, adage that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I am not necessarily sure that that must necessarily happen, because I've known leaders, you know, in government, outside government, who have really not been changed by power. The only thing is that the power of the powerful forces against interests of the majority tend to overwhelm these people. So in a way that partly happened in South Africa, where a few African elites with privileges, once they joined in, they quickly became very comfortable and forgot where they came from. When you look at our good friends in the NRM, some of them are people who left Uganda People's Congress in the 70s, thinking that UPC was not left-wing enough. But now, really, they're the spoilers in town and the looters in town, including, in many cases, excess corruptions, and dealing with guys against whom we fought, not because they were bad guys, but we fought against them because they were exploitative guys, you know, about the African causes for which Uganda National Congress, Uganda People's Congress was then found. Now, but back to this. My other high was the election in Zambia of a new president, where the incumbent was actually refusing to try to go for nice seat. You know, our chairs are very comfortable here. Yeah. You know, but the power of the people, including Fonko's, very likely of the likes of the Desmond Tutus, that look, you know, you guys, I know phone calls need to take place, I don't know what Tutu is, but look, you guys, don't embarrass us, move on. These coups is a manifestation of the bigger lack of leadership on the continent, and that to me is the worrying thing. With the fading off of the likes of Desmond Tutu, with the fading off of Kenneth Kaunda, I'm not sure that we are having many remaining African father figure leaders who can pick up phones and tell Mr. Museveni's of this world that, look, you know, my brother, you know, I think check it down there. Have you given a thought about this? Those are the lacking things.
You know, when the white people came around during the days of colonization, they said we are the only people who can ensure peace to actually come into the African setting because of the new administrative structure that we are bringing about, the democracy that we are bringing about. We are sure that we are the only ones that can bring about democracy and peace in the African setting. Don't you think people like Desmond Tutu were overreacted when they would hear reports of people like President Museveni saying that they are the only leaders? If they are in power, who can bring about peace? When they leave, there's going to be turmoil taking center stage. Doesn't that bring back hallmarks of those dark days? It
does, and that is an absolute contradiction, and that's part of the problem. And in fact, when you're saying that about Desmond Tutu, I quickly thought about Uganda, and that is the result of it. And quite, if you look at it in the context of Uganda, then you realize that that's actually blackmail. And in this case, in Uganda's case, Mr. Museveni is blackmailing Uganda, so that without him, there's no peace, cannot be peace. Without him, there can be no democracy. When actually, in the reality, with him, there has not necessarily been democracy, and with him there have actually been huge amount of insecurities in this country, and you could argue with him was a cause of insecurity in this country before that. I think in South Africa particularly, I feel rather disappointed in some circles where the strongest and the most solid constitution, the most advanced public systems intact and in place, but serving a very specific minority of white privilege. And as I said, a few black privileges that came and became comfortable with them and basically now subjugating the majority of the African people, the majority of the South African people. There is very little evidence that there are any whites or Asians in South Africa who are underprivileged. I know not been in the last several years, but quite clearly, it is really in a situation in which, as you would argue, a bit of change of guard rather than really fundamental change, to use Mr. Museveni's word. And on this morning, I borrow that because it's absolutely true. It's very disappointing. But like I was saying, as the Mandelas faded, the Tutus faded, the Kaundas faded, the Warriors faded here in Uganda, the Elangots faded off in Uganda, the Otieno Simbas faded off in Uganda today. I'm not quite sure whether between that generation and my generation and the current leadership, that there are people who are genuinely African-driven leaders, as in this case you could pose the Kaundas of this world, the Lumumbas of this world, the Obotes of this world, the Nyeras of this world, who simply saw what you're saying, we need to transform this continent and give it to our peoples. There are possibilities. You know, you had a fantastic guest in this subject before I came on the program. On digital inclusion and looking forward. I think some of those thoughts, as a matter of reality, must actually be in the mainstream of national agendas, where political parties and political leaders and governments need to be able to take on these things. He's rather milder on the regulations. I think digital inclusion must be something taken as a matter of policy by political parties, as a matter of policy by government, and deliberate policy, not to be lobbied, but to change. As is quite rightly saying, there's no reason why it should cost EU 17% to literally transfer money. There's no reason why it should pay for it at why it should be it should cost you to use your phone to pay bills. There's no reason why recent fuel increases, we don't do what other governments do. When fuel crises go, I'll just use it as a quick example. When fuel prices rise because of global imperatives, sensible governments find ways of mitigating taxes and to make sure that the most affected communities are not affected. Perhaps in tax rebates, meaning that, well, if a school truck pays at the pump, the school can show that, well, we bought 100 liters and you get a rebate, you get a refund, something along those lines. So there are many ways in which government is able to do many of these other things. But as far as that's concerned, one of the reasons why I'm actually in the studios is because where I slept last night, don't ask me where, but it's a fine place. you know, there was no guarantee that I could necessarily have had a conversation with you in Zoom. But in a Gongera, I would have a successful one. I've had a few with you. Why? Because actually it made noise and there was a reasonable improvement. That really, if I cannot have a decent conversation with you on Zoom today in Kampala, you know, what about the guys in Karamoja? What about the guys who are possibly in Nagongera, the other end of Nagongera, but cannot shout loud enough? Is it a privilege to me? No, it's simply that I'm loud. But if I can't do that, what's the responsibility of government? What's the responsibility of our good friends in the legislature?
Back in the day, Joseph Forteno, taxes were used to actually consolidate power, to keep the tax man in power, to keep the white man in power. That was back in the day. It's also another model that we borrowed as Africans. Do you think we've continued to actually remove taxes from our people, but then to serve a purpose of, you know, alleviating the challenges of the people? Or have we continued to use taxes to consolidate power, just like the white man?
Oh, interestingly, taxation and tax works, and I believe in big government, and there's a progressive left. Tax is actually the most organized way of actually managing both fiscal and various broad spectrum of structural programs, whatever it is. How you do it is what matters, you know. Clearly, I gave an example of oil prices. Clearly, the problem in our country is not whether or not we have taxes or not, but simply whether or not governments use our monies properly. I know people have argued that taxation and corruption goes hand in hand. It is obviously true that progressive taxation, for which the majority of the rural folks don't pay tax or any other taxes at all, direct taxes and all, it makes absolute sense. But at the end of the day, we pay rather very negative regressive taxes on sugar. you know, whether you buy sugar in Nagongera or in Kinkizi, you'll pay the same amount of money in Nagongera, depending on who's actually the supplier. And many of the people in Kampala, it will not be known whether it's Romeo or Joseph Forteno paying for it. Doesn't matter what we're in the pockets. So those are, as I said, some of the smart things that need to be able to conversation to be able to put hard. But I think government deliberately, because of the shrinking of some of the space, and I'm grateful.
Because at the end of the day, people are going to be paying taxes, and then you do have striking medical interns, you do have striking doctors, you do have people who are just putting up all these contestations left, right, and center in the wake of reports that we are paying taxes. Isn't this a cause of concern? Because it took center stage during the colonial days. We were paying taxes, but they were going towards actually replenishing the lost energy of the white man, not actually helping the peasants who were paying these taxes. And it seems like the same trend has continued in this day and age. Most of the money is not going back into the sectors where it's needed. Health, education, and many of these sectors. We are seeing it going to security and so forth.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So I'm saying
consolidation.
Taxation per se is not a problem. How you spend it, how you spend it, and how you spread it, and basically how you apply it. At the end of the day, actually, the colonial one is very interesting. In Tororo, you know, Uganda National Congress at the time pushed Bukedi actually to help speed up the process of independence when it was established that these guys went to war. Actually, 12 people died in 1960. Where people were protesting British tax, and in a way a bit of Buganda element, because Buganda was the Kakunguru front of there, and the argument was that, I don't know to go too much details of it, but some of the agents of the British establishment were taking some money and bringing it back into Buganda, not formal, and part of it going to Britain. Absolutely true. But no, the medical strikes one is a clear example. If you look at our budgets, and if you look at tax base, which by and large should be broadened, but should be broadened progressively, fine enough. You know, what is the health budget and what's the security budget? Number two. Point number three, how much money was given, donations towards COVID? How much money have we raised in terms of borrowing? In fact, serious one actually, adding the national debt burden in the name of COVID. Can we account for that? To date, we cannot. To date, we cannot, and those are some of the problems. And by the quickly, talk about actually the highs and lows in a way of this year. I happen to be one of those people who very early on last year, in a very unique way, deliberately challenged all the citizens of Uganda, on behalf of all of us, including Mr. Museveni, saying that COVID was an opportunity for us to begin to do things openly. COVID was an opportunity for us to come together as a nation, and COVID was an opportunity for leadership to emerge, in which case this time led by Mr. Museveni, to bring people together so that we're able to, one, secure our country, protect lives and properties, and then engage as a citizenry to know that, well, actually, when it comes to what they say is that when we build hospitals, it doesn't know UPC, Catholic, and or Romeo or Ocheno. It just knows human beings. So it's basically, in my opinion, it's a deliberate question of leadership on many of these things. But
well, of course, back, fast forward to 2020, 2021, we are seeing taxpayers' money make it into politics.
It has always been.
The power of the incumbency. President Museveni using taxpayers' money to expedite campaigns left, right and centre. The heavy commercialization of politics in Uganda. Let's talk about that, because the conversation came from consolidation of power during the days of colonization. But we are seeing the same taxpayers' money being used to actually pay off voters in that regard during campaigns. Talk about commercialization and the normalization of the same. The fact that you have NRM cadres who are saying it is okay to splash around money.
It is actually criminal. But I also want to tell you that it might have happened during colonial days. It did not happen by and large under Obote 1, and did not happen in Obote 2. I was lucky enough to be alive and a student at the time. It did not happen. So this is a new phenomenon. Why am I saying it? I'm saying to the young people of this country that it's actually possible for us to have politics based on competition of ideas. It's actually possible for you to go and follow leaders based on the ideals and values, and leaders and political parties based on the ideas and values they represent and aspire, rather than the amount of money. And actually, the more we do that, the less it will be about the money. But you're absolutely right. It's actually criminal. You know, to the fact that actually a leader, can actually waive, a minister can actually waive money. Here is money we are distributing, and the police does nothing, and it's business as usual. It is actually criminal. Number two, I think the more we do that, the less we're able to discuss the value of our taxes. And then part of the contradiction is you cannot ask me to pay money, to give money and paying my taxes, and there's no guarantee that that money is going to offer me the services. But on the other hand, you're actually going to use the money to buy our people. No, I think wherever we go, because of the weaknesses, in my opinion, to an extent, from our point of view, for different reasons, as political positions mainly, I think the incumbent, and particularly Mr. Museveni and his organization, political organization NRM, have actually found it as a space in order to be able to buy off and use people's money, which they do. Number two. But number three, particularly because these guys have been in power for such a long time that you Romeo, and others don't really know any other government as adults. You think, as you rightly say, it's normal. It's normal for me to go to, I know somebody, a young lady in NRM, fantastic young lady, good enough, she's reviewing her views, she's her position going forward. She stood for parliament, and she was basically, she got a phone call, and she was told, leave it for the other guy, I'll give you money. And it's a huge amount of money, more than 4 times I would actually spend in the parliamentary election. But she was being told to stand down. Those are the kind of things that we're trying to talk about. But
we also do have the Prime Minister who was allegedly implicated in a bribery scandal in the Kayunga LC5 by-election that just transpired. She was giving out 4,000 Ghana shillings to the voters to actually elect Andrew Mwonge.
I was coming...
Allegedly.
Indeed, and I was coming to that allegedly she was involved in that. And this is something that I hope beyond Christmas, the legislators will come to the floor of Parliament and tell Ugandan citizens what exactly happened, if it's really true that is actually the role of a prime minister. And actually talk about Kayunga and politics and this again. I have been around the world and I've monitored and been participating in elections, in a few places. I don't know an average by-election that would involve how expensive a presidential outrage for a by-election for a local government, a by-election for a prime minister, a by-election for where a prime minister attends and dishes that money, and a by-election where you deploy as my security. Merely by-election, I'm not saying it's not important. You'll be able to do that.
Because the deployment is largely non-existent right now. I don't see any, uniformed red top police officers or military officers on the police, on the streets. It was largely because of the Kayunga by-election, because we didn't even see the same deployment after the explosions at Parliamentary Avenue, even at CPS. It wasn't just as huge as what we saw in Kayunga.
Fantastic.
And the surrounding environment.
I was coming from Tororo the other day, and I was approaching Mukono. And as I entered into Mukono and I entered into mainstream Kampala, I found a sense of normalcy. And I had 2 things. One, well, there is this insecurity thing. But 2, oh, what a fantastic situation possibly being held that the security is playing in rear back on this. Is it no wonder that some people are saying, is this ADF or not ADF, or how much does the government know and how much don't we know? You're absolutely right. That was a time when you'd find many of these guys. But do you know why these guys are deployed? Generally, these guys are deployed to intimidate. These guys are deployed to blackmail. These guys are deployed exactly for the reasons that you give, that Mr. Museveni and his particular hardline group have attempted to present to the people of Uganda that without us, there is no stability, and without us, this country cannot be stable, and without us, you will see trouble. And the argument is because when they were not there, they caused trouble. Now that they're here, they're saying that you either stay firm because we will cause trouble to you, or if you let us go, we shall cause trouble. I think that is rather simplistic and an estimation of the people of this country. For me, from my position and from the experience of a UPC government and the possibilities of the future, I'm just encouraging the government to review its position. I'm encouraging some an old man, even me, I'm now getting rather old, I can feel in the morning, he's done his bit. He should review, raise conscience, and he should revisit some of Desmond Tutu's words and begin to think about the future, about his bazukulu, and to begin to believe in the possibility for Uganda without him, and to begin to believe in the possibility without him and all his direct contribution, to begin to think about a possibility of Uganda in which there is unity and national healing. There's a former prime minister whom I had in the last few days talking about healing of a nation. A rather arrogant...
Uganda.
No, not Ndugu. A rather arrogant and hard guy, and it was rather shocking with this about spirit of Christmas. But it was a welcome thing that if people can review, maybe they're trying to play nice for us on television and on radio. That is possible for us to heal as a nation and unite as a nation, and to begin to focus on the other things. And
the saddest part about this, Joseph Forteno, is that we are not only normalizing commercialization of politics, we are also normalizing violence. When people get beaten up left, right, and center, people are going to say, well, security got intelligence that these people are going to cause havoc. That's why we swung into action and beat them up and maybe shower them with tear gas. Is that always justification for the violence that we see left, right, and center? Is there a real threat coming in from the opposition that actually warrants such heavy-handedness that we are seeing?
Perhaps because there's so much to say within this short time, I was actually developing a conversation around that. And that's why I was saying that maybe it's unfortunate for those of us in the opposition that perhaps we have insufficient leadership, and a bit of a guarded critiquing of our own selves. My view is this, that the opposition need to pick on these things and run with it. I think we need to be organized enough within our internal political parties and organizations and across the democratic opposition particularly, and have one voice and pick one thing and run with it. I think we need to be able to do it in such a coherent manner that every day, every morning, Mr. Museveni knows that we are demanding for accountability. We are demanding for an explanation on why we went to Congo. We are demanding for why Parliament was not consulted. We are demanding for what exactly is the evidence. Now we are seeing some evidence allegedly about ADF. How long did we know ADF was in Congo prior to the bombings campaign? Are they necessarily related? No. Because I think we are not consistently pushing enough. Because I think many people, and Museveni is doing it very well, he uses many people in our circles, because I feel it. Some people come and say that, well, if you do this, they will beat you. If you do this, they'll cause problems. But why not? People have already died. Last year we lost 54. How many people have died since then until today? We need to take a position. Mr. Museveni needs to know that a critical element of Ugandans, makes it rather impossible for him to have the quiet of the night that he wants for the future. It's actually in his best interest that we find a way in which together we're able to focus. And I was just thinking when you're talking about this leadership thing, I remember, let me just give you an example. Even after 1985 coup, in which DP was with Museveni involved, and they overthrew a government. In 1991, when Obote formed the Presidential Police Commission, I go into the back, sometimes people wonder why, but it's very deliberate because about the possibilities of the future, because these things have ever happened in the past. Obote actually told Cecile Gual and team, who were there.
91?
Yes, no, 91, when they formed the Presidential Police Commission. Once Semogero was in government with Museveni, he said, make sure that you don't treat DP as your opponents. So that's a message of conciliation, reconciliation, and the possibility of looking forward. The idea was that the democratic political parties need to think together and act together in strategic national interest. That's why I told you that when COVID came, I was able to say, Mr. Museveni, there's an time for you to lead and all of us to rally around in terms of national interest.
Let's talk about the role.
That is less about... Sorry?
Let's talk about the role of the young people, because this is really important.
Extremely
important. When it comes to demanding accountability, who is at the forefront? It must be the young people.
Yeah.
Back in the day, during the days of apartheid, who was at the forefront of, asking for accountability and demanding for fairness and justice? They were the young people. Why is it that the young people of this day and age are not, so out there, you know, involved in the politics of their countries. When you give, when you ask some of the young people in this day and age why they are not getting involved in politics, they'll tell you bullets.
And
two of my counterparts were shot dead, I ran away. That's what they would tell you. But back in the day, when you shot 10 people, that resistance grew by 20. That resistance grew by 50. It grew by 100. It grew by 1,000,000. More people would come and join that revolution. But in this day and age, we are seeing lesser involvement of the young people. Why?
Primarily in part because of the reasons that we gave earlier, that young people see a few killings and rush back and see a bit of ourselves, tell them don't go. I know a young person who was told by her mother, she's a student, and she was told by her mother that please don't engage because our family has had a history of losing people in the course of these campaigns. Actually today, the young people nearly by and large elected Bernie Sanders in the United States. He's a very old man, but his ideas about the future. By and large, the young people actually diselected Trump. By and large, in fact, massively, the young people and women elected my brother Barack Obama. The young people caused nearly a revolution in Britain with my friend Jeremy Corbyn. You know, young people, by and large, you know, participated substantially in the Sudan, and they continue to be able to do so.
You know, Joseph Forteno, before we go for a short break, there are two, you know, analogies here. There's one that says young people might not want to involve in the politics of their country, and there's another that says government is making it impossible for them to actually get involved in the politics of their countries. We're going to actually explore those two variations after this short break. You're still watching Morning at NTV. I still have Joseph Forteno, a member of the Uganda People's Congress. We'll be right back after this short break with this conversation.